Test 1, 2. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Temple Beth Shalom as we honor and memorialize Jonathan Symons. Jonathan, who, to the best of our knowledge, did not have a cell phone, or if he did not use it very often. He did have a cell phone. He was very good at turning it off, and I would encourage all of you to please, to honor this moment, to please silence your cell phones. Thank you.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell forever, and I shall dwell forever in the house of the Lord.
And thus we gather together and we raise our voices together, asking for comfort and strength. We need light when gloom darkens our lives. We need fortitude and courage when pain and loss assail us. Who among us has not passed through trials and bereavements? Some of us bear fresh wounds in our hearts and therefore feel more keenly the kinship of sorrow. Others, our days of mourning are more remote, and yet we still recall the comfort that sympathy brought to our sorrowing hearts. May our sharing of sorrow and our deeds of solace bring comfort to all of us, the friends of Jonathan Symons. The poet writes, Leda hi reshit uftira taklit. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength, or strength to weakness, and often back again, from health to sickness, and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Leda hi reshit uftira taklit. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, But life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage, from birth to death to life everlasting.
First, I want to thank the members of our regular worshipers, Friday night and Shabbat morning, who are here, because Jonathan loved being with us in that setting. And whenever he was in town, this is where he found his community. And for you to come out at this moment is a beautiful tribute to the relationship you built over not a long time, just brief moments throughout the year when he visited, and the connections that he made with so many of us. In the opening song in Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye, the milkman, says, "Because of our traditions, everyone knows who he is and what God expects him to do." Jonathan Symons was first and always a man of Jewish tradition. His tradition flowed first and foremost from his father and his mother. What they did, he continued to do throughout his life. He was, in many ways, an ish emunah, a man of loyalty and faith. Faith to what he learned in his home, faith to what he grew up in, and he carried it out virtually until the last day of his life. He knew who he was and what God and his parents expected him to do. I first met Jonathan here in Miami Beach. He was on holiday, following in his father's footsteps in the old sanctuary. He used to sit right over in that area, which is where his father sat when his father was on holiday. And Jonathan was there, and it was around Passover time. And I asked him at the after services, "Where are you going for Seder?" He didn't have a place, so I invited him to join us. I didn't ask Joni. I knew she would agree. But we were going to have 40, 39, what was another? So Jonathan came for the first time to our home for Seder, and he adopted our family. And every year he made a point of coming, and we saw our kids grow up, came for their bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvah, came for all of the events of our family, and then came to Beth Shalom and adopted Beth Shalom as his American synagogue. In England, he had an Orthodox synagogue. And here he eventually got an Orthodox synagogue on Lincoln Road with Rabbi Katz. But this was his synagogue. And he used to say over and over, whenever a new song was introduced, either by Cantor Haas or Cantor Siegel in English or something unusual, he'd say, "Only in America." Only in America. But he kept coming back because he had that emunah, that loyalty, that sense of tradition, and he followed it throughout his life. And through Beth Shalom, he found his way to the Jewish Museum and Marcia Zarevitz. The way Jonathan became attached to a place was through an individual, what he would call chemistry. If he had chemistry with an individual, then that individual's institution could become his institution. And that's how it worked. And when he went to a place and was thinking of making a donation and there was no chemistry, forget it. He never went back. That was Jonathan. It was through the individual that he connected to the institution. 2 weeks ago, on Sunday morning, Rabbi Pomerantz got a hold of me. She was at an all-day retreat, board retreat, and my phone, as usual, was off, particularly in the mornings. And I had just turned it on, and she finally connected with me, and Opal had been trying to reach me. And I learned that Jonathan had died. And there was the initial shock. And then we were trying to find a way to reach somebody, because what Opal said is that he was in a hospital, that nobody knew who he was, and nobody had any contact information for him. And so I called Rabbi Katz as a Chabad rabbi. He has connections all over the world. And he knew Jonathan well, and so he was up in New York at the annual gathering of the tens of thousands of Chabad rabbis. But he left the meeting and called his father-in-law in England, London, who is an Orthodox rabbi. That rabbi, his father-in-law, was able to call the hospital, let them know first that he was Jewish, because they had asked for a priest. They didn't know who he was. And then that was established, and then we started the process with Opal calling her friend, and I talked to the father-in-law in London, and eventually we were able to reach Jonathan's niece, and then his sister, and his uncle and aunt, and finally, on Wednesday at the Old Bushy Cemetery in London, outside of London, at 12:30 on Wednesday, he was buried. After this kind of initial rush of trying to make something happen in England for Jonathan, when I paused to think about it, first, of course, I remained shocked in many ways, but I got angry. I really was angry. First and foremost at Jonathan. You know, a number of years ago here, on the High Holy Days, he had a heart issue during the High Holy Days, and Michael and Dr. Wadnicki and some others from our congregation took care of him and got him through that. But he never took it seriously enough, and he was totally blocked, apparently, and had this massive coronary. And I was angry also at life, at God, at fate, that he should end this way. I thought about it. This generous man who had helped and supported so many people, so many institutions over the world, was alone, was utterly alone on the last day of his life. And not just the last day. He was unknown to the strangers who saw him having that attack in a parking lot in his car, to the ambulance workers who came to get him, to the nurses and the doctors. They had no idea who he was. And afterwards, they went through his wallet to try and call a next of kin, and the only number he had was an outdated number of his sister's, and they couldn't reach her. And so they called the fire department and the police to go to his apartment, and finally they found his book of numbers, and they reached Opal, who then went through Rabbi Pomerantz to me, and we started it. And 2.5 days, he lay there, anonymous, alone. And it took 3.5 days after that for him to be buried. I was angry. It was wrong that this should be the end. He deserved better, I thought. And at that moment, I recalled a folk tale, and the reason is because Joni and I had just been on a trip where we'd been in Poland, and we'd been at Krakow at the Ramah Synagogue, and we had been at the grave of Yosela the Holy Miser. And that's the story that occurred to me at that moment. Yosela was rich and miserly, gave to nobody. And so when he died in Krakow, the community refused to bury him. And he lay there for days. Finally, at the rabbi's orders, he was buried, but he was buried in the section in the very back of the cemetery where the paupers are buried and the outcasts are buried. And they put a tiny little stone up for him. And then something happened. On Friday of that week after Yosela had died, scores of people came to the rabbi's home asking for money, people who had never asked before. And they all had the same story. Every week, every Thursday, they found secretly hidden on their doorstep a packet of money for Shabbat needs. And it took care of them for that week, every Thursday. And so they never had asked the rabbi for any money. But now it wasn't there. It was gone. And the rabbi knew it was Yosela, the miser, the holy miser, who had not been a miser. He had been a generous man, but secretly. He'd been giving all of this money to the people who were there. Now, Jonathan was not like that. First, he was not a miser. And secondly, he loved the public recognition of his gifts. He did. He reveled in all of the wonderful gifts that he gave to so many of our institutions. He was proud of it. First gift he gave here, the meditation garden in the back, he put in honor of his mother and father in the social hall in his name. And then there's the funding of our youth programming, enormous amount over 20 years, consistently making sure we had the best youth program that could possibly exist and that it was funded. But also from there he went, Marcia's going to tell you about FIU, more importantly the Jewish Museum, which he loved and was devoted to, and he loved the history of it, and he loved being involved in it, and the Chabad on Lincoln Road, and others. You can ask Simon about his gifts to Federation, even though his initial involvement with Federation wasn't so positive. He eventually came back. He was a man who was publicly very generous. But that's not really what I want to talk about, because he was also generous in England. Lord Sachs, he was involved in a lot of his projects. He was involved in his father's synagogue, which became his synagogue, a little teeny synagogue on the wrong side of town that he still davened in. He was active. He devoted monies to an orphanage in Eastern Europe, to yeshiva. In Israel, he was active and involved financially in many places. But I think he was more than that. What I treasured about Jonathan was not just the public gifts. What I treasured was the private tzedakah that he did. And I want to explain that. Because his public tzedakah made him a Baal tzedakah. But I think he was more than that. You know, when the rabbi found out about Yosela, the holy miser, he decided to add to the grave a larger stone, and he added the word Hatzadik, the righteous man. And that's how I see Jonathan. Because of, just like Yosela, the private, unannounced, unpublicized tzedakah that he did personally, not just with money, but with his own hands and his own physical commitment. He took care of people who had been deserted by almost everyone, who were virtually alone and in need. In their pain and need, he stood by them, and he personally committed himself to their care. And the care wasn't just until they died. He took care of them after they died to make sure they were properly buried and remembered. And these people that he cared for, at least the ones I was privileged to see him with, were often very difficult people, not easy. These were people who had little gratitude toward him, who rarely said thank you or appreciated him, who constantly had new challenges that presented themselves to him, who were critical of him verbally, who even at times were abusive. So I want to share just one story, because it's probably the one that most connects me to this kind of personal aspect of his life. A woman that he had a relationship with, became friends with, received a diagnosis of Huntington's disease. This is a degenerative disease that ends in death after a slow, long, difficult plunging into not being able to move, not being able to talk, not even barely being able to eat. Her family had basically neglected her, deserted her. She had a few friends, but no one who could devote what was necessary to care for her. And from London and from South Florida, Jonathan kept constant contact with her, with nurses, with aides that he hired, that he paid for, that he took care of, that he contacted all the time, and with the facilities that she was in. And when she became aggressive, physically and verbally, he found a new facility, and he moved her. And he found other aides when the aides couldn't work with her any longer. He supported her. He cajoled the staff. He worked with the aides by phone and in person. And when he was in town, he and I would always go and visit. It was at his request. It was not an easy visit, I have to say. I found it difficult, often just to be there. He didn't. He was there whether I took us or not. But we would go each time. We used to take her out for lunch, even though he had to feed her at the table, but he wanted to get her out of the facility. And then she couldn't move any longer, and so he would bring food from Arnie and Richie. She loved the sandwiches over here, the tuna. And he would bring that, and he would bring food for the aide, and we would go there, and he would spoon feed and talk to her and cajole her and charm her. And she would yell at him at times and berate him and pinch him and hit him. And he returned each blow with kindness and with love. And when she died, he made sure she was properly buried. And we arranged a service for when Jonathan was here, and he spoke beautifully about her and about the qualities he admired. And he continued to contact and help her aides who had been so gentle and loving with her. Not just her, but them as well. And I've personally actually seen Jonathan with others like that. I've had that privilege to see this man that you wouldn't think would act that way, do it over and over again. That's a tzaddik. Yosela, like Yosela, Jonathan received an unfair death and burial process. In the legend of Yosela, the rabbi decides to rebury him in a more prominent place in the Ramah cemetery. And the night before the reburial is to take place, Yosela appears to the rabbi in a dream, and he says, "Do not move my grave. It's my honor to be among the outcasts and the paupers." And so to this day, that is where his grave remains. The stone is somewhat larger now, and there you will find stones all around it as people visit it and put these stones on it. I'm no longer shocked or angry about Jonathan's death. I'm simply grieving my loss of this quirky, unusual, special man. And Jonathan did not appear to me in a dream. But for me, his death validated his true title. His name, Yehuda ben Yitzchak, HaTzadik, Jonathan Symons, the holy, righteous mensch. Zecher Tzadik Livracha Yedidi. I'd like to ask Marcia Zarevitz to come forward and to speak.
I was just thinking that the last time you and I did this, I was just thinking that the last time we had this duo was when we dedicated Jonathan Symons' building at the museum. It was you and me.
It's a lot different.
Yeah. Who would have thought? London calling is how Jonathan would start our phone calls. And I see a lot of you nodding, so you know that's it, London calling. Our phone chats. The last London calling was Thursday, November 21. We recalled memories of Shabbat during our growing up years. He said, Shabbat came about 3:30 p.m. in the winter months. We came home from school on Fridays. We wouldn't turn on the lights. The candles were lit, and I remember we had a Shabbat kettle. And then Jonathan and I spoke about the sacredness of dying on Shabbat. My rabbi often said that righteous people die on Shabbat. Surely Jonathan was a righteous person, and he died the next day on Shabbat. Born in London, Jonathan first came to Miami Beach in 1985 as his father, as Rabbi mentioned, purchased a condo here in 1979. Father and son were in commercial real estate in England, raised in a kosher home and attending an Orthodox shul since childhood. Jonathan had been deeply involved in the British Jewish community. There he supported cultural heritage, Jewish care institutions, the expansion of Jewish schools and religious networks, because he felt these were important to ensure Jewish continuity. His newest project was converting a defunct 1872 Victorian stone Welsh synagogue that he and two others purchased, converting it into a Jewish museum. How familiar. For the past 3 months, we have been discussing the steps in that process, creating a strategic plan and all the rest to make this a successful endeavor. He said, the personal stories are very important. Like Florida, the Welsh Jewish community has more than 250 years of history. Jonathan was very excited about the parallels between the Jewish history of Florida and that of Wales. Jonathan had many friends on both sides of the pond, and each connection had meaning to him. One in London wrote to me that he was a kind and caring gentleman. Another wrote, his humanity deeply impacted my life. Jonathan was a dear friend to many in this sanctuary. He cared about you. You cared about him. For the past 12 years, Jonathan has been my friend. We spoke regularly about the state of the world and how it impacts the Jews, especially the increase in global anti-Semitism. We spoke about the institutions and organizations that were important to Jewish life. I have been raising money for the Jewish community my entire life, and along the way, I concluded that the ultimate goal of solicitation is not just procuring the funds. It is really about shared values and cultivating a friendship. 5 weeks ago, Jonathan traveled to Florida's West Coast for the first time to celebrate my 80th birthday with me. To him, that trip was as if he had crossed the Atlantic Ocean. But he did it for friendship. That is when, in the last few weeks of his life, he experienced another first, because I took him sailing. And a rarity, he drove a car here in Florida. Jonathan and I bonded over Jewish continuity. We both understood that roots and memories help ensure Jewish continuity. Like cut flowers, Jews wither without our roots. Our collective memories are our roots. We concurred that we have to look backward to ensure we have a forward. He embraced the mission of the Jewish Museum of Florida because he was caring and brilliant. He absorbed and remembered the stories and facts and dates more than anyone I've ever encountered. He shocked me about what he would come up with. I mean, I thought I was the one that knew all this, and he remembered everything. He had a deep passion to transmit the history to others, especially young people, because he felt the knowledge strengthened Jewish identity. This is why he sponsored the Bar and Bat Mitzvah program to present a museum family membership at the coming-of-age rituals. When he was on Miami Beach, his favorite thing was to be a docent at the museum to share with others what Jews have accomplished, how Jews have improved the quality of life for all people. He said, "It makes me proud to be Jewish." He called me every time he doceted, excited to relate his experience. And he was so looking forward to the December 25th annual tour that he does with Beth Shalom members. Jonathan's financial support of the Jewish Museum is the largest of any individual in the museum's 24 years, and his residence is London. Amazing, because he understood the museum's mission, and Jewish family and Jewish people have no geographical boundaries. He asked a lot of questions and was a man of deep thought that resulted in action. Jonathan had a playful aura about him, as most of you know, a wonderful chuckle, and a lilt in his British accented voice. He liked jokes and teaser questions, right? Jonathan was a low-tech kind of fellow. To reach him by email, I had to write a friend of his in London who printed out the messages and carried them to him like a carrier pigeon. His cell phone was basic. He had one, but it was the most basic, and could send and receive only very simple text. You couldn't send him a picture or anything of any length, like an article. I was always trying to send him articles. That wouldn't go through. He spent little on himself, with Romero Brito artworks from Lincoln Road being his luxury purchases, but he always thought of others. When someone asked him if he was in fundraising, he would say, "I write checks." And that is what he did when he saw a Jewish need that he could help fix. He was our fixer. He gave because he felt it would encourage others to be generous to the causes about which he cared. Jonathan had a huge heart, and in the end, his heart failed him. And what troubles me so much, as Rabbi Gary spoke about, is that even though he was family to so many, he died alone. But Jonathan was not spiritually alone. He left behind a community of innumerable beneficiaries of his good deeds and a diversity of friends who cared about him and could speak volumes about this loss. Jonathan Justin Symons was a Gutana Neshuma and a righteous person. Each of us here in this sanctuary loves him as he loved us. The memory of what he did for Jewish continuity and Jewish community will always be in our hearts. He left this world a better place, but he left us too early. He had so much more good work to do. I wish he had cared for himself like he cared for others. Shalom, rest in peace, dear friend. Your London calling is already missed. He always ended the phone calls. Good to chat.
Such beautiful words. Since Jonathan's tragic and untimely death just a few weeks ago, many of us have been grieving by sharing stories about him with each other. While he loved this congregation and he loved Rabbi Glickstein, there were things that he just couldn't get about us. In my last conversation with him, I remember we were standing at the Oneg, and I was telling him about visual tefillah, which was used for the very first time at the tribe's High Holy Day service. So visual tefillah is when prayers are projected onto a screen along with beautiful visuals so that people don't have to keep their face in their prayer book. So I told Jonathan about this, and he just kind of shrugged his shoulders, rolled his eyes, and said, "Only in America." Thank you, Linda. And yet, despite his scoffing at many of our customs and innovations, he fully embraced our community, and we in turn embraced him. Here, he was respected, valued, and included. And because of this, he ultimately embraced many of our quirky American ways. As you know, Jonathan was passionate about his Jewish identity, and despite his traditional roots, he supported many of our most innovative traditions here at Temple Beth Shalom and programs, especially around educating Jewish youth. He fully endowed our ... program, which was a travel-based program, and then later our J-Travel programs for students, where students learned and bonded through these immersive Jewish travel experiences. Whatever Rabbi Morrison imagined and created, Jonathan supported, whether it was travel to Chicago, Costa Rica, Rabbi Davis's favorite, New York, or the ultimate delight for him, which was London. Jonathan relished this opportunity to endow impactful Jewish experiences for youth, and hundreds of our Temple Beth Shalom teens and their dear friends benefited from these experiences. And to show their gratitude to him, they wrote thank you notes to him at the end of each experience. And so as a tribute to him and really the final words about him, I'm going to give to our youth. And here I'm sharing 3 thank you notes that went to Jonathan. The first one was from a student who went to a program called Give Kids the World, where kids who have terminal illnesses are able to go to the theme parks in Orlando, and our students help to support this through serving food to them and taking care of their needs. So here is a note written by one of our boys whose grandmother happens to be with us, Dawson. Dear Mr. Symons, thank you for your generosity in extending me the opportunity to go on this trip. Working with the charity Give Kids the World has allowed me a great opportunity to truly put my life in perspective. The problems that had weighed on me previously now seem quite insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Furthermore, the feeling I get from feeling that I made an impact in these children's lives is second to none. With much gratitude, Dawson. The second letter is written by a student who went to the Litaken program in Washington, D.C., which we bring our students to annually. It's the Religious Action Center where they learn all about social issues, Jewish values, and have the opportunity to learn about religious advocacy. So this young man wrote, Dear Mr. Symons, my name is Blake, and I participated in the J-Travel Litaken Washington, D.C. trip. I really appreciate your generous donation for making this trip possible. I had so much fun on this trip. I made so many memories and friendships that will last a lifetime. I really enjoyed the Holocaust Museum, even though I have seen it before. I appreciated it more this past trip because it was a Jewish trip. The speech I gave was on gun violence prevention, and I gave that speech in Marco Rubio's office. Being in the Capitol building made me feel professional and helped me to understand a little bit of what goes into our government. Thank you again. Respectfully, Blake. And then the final note I'll share with you is from someone who was the beneficiary of going on the trip to London, which was, of course, the all-time best J-Travel trip. And this is what he wrote. Dear Mr. Symons, it is with the greatest respect that I thank you for this opportunity to see your beautiful country. England is a country with an immensely rich history. This trip has been the best trip I've been on. My favorite part of this trip was the Shabbat ceremony, as well as getting to meet you. You are truly a great man whose heart is bigger than you are. Thank you for blessing me with the ability to see a plethora of fabulous places and experiences, the world's treasures. I aspire to be as generous as you. Sincerely, Jared. And so we know that the impact that Jonathan's tzedakah had on Jewish teenagers' lives will be felt long, long after he is gone. And Cantor Siegel is going to share a song with us called Yesh Kochavim, which speaks about the light of the stars reaching us long after they are gone. And I know that, too, is how Jonathan will be remembered.
There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light. Long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us. Hem, hem, shemarim la'adam et haderech, et haderech. Hem, hem, shemarim la'adam et haderech, et haderech. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. We remember. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. We remember. We remember. We remember.
I'll ask all of those who can to please rise.
El Malei Rachamim Shochein Bameromim Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanafei HaShekhinah Im Kedoshim Utohorim Kezohar Harakia Mazihirim Et Nishmat Yehuda Ben Yitzchak Shehalcha Leolamo Bal Harachamim Yastirehu Kezohar Kenafim Leolamim Veitzror Bitzror HaChaim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato V'yanuach b'shalom Al Mishkavo Venomar
Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Jonathan Symons, Yehuda ben Yitzchak HaTzadik, who has entered eternity. God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and we say,
Amen. We remain standing now for words of Kaddish. We praise God, the giver of life. with these words. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, Be'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlik malchutei, B'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'gala v'yizman kariv v'yimru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam l'olmei almaya, Yitbarak v'yishtabak v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, V'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudasha b'richu, Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, Damiran be'alma v'yimru Amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya, V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Osei shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. May the author of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort all who are bereaved here and everywhere with shalom, with peace. And now I'd like to invite all the clergy who are here to please come up for our closing song. So it's unusual to have a closing song at a memorial service, although our tradition teaches that there are 3 ways to mourn: to cry, to be silent, and to sing. And one of the things that Jonathan loved more than anything was our Shabbat morning minyan. And minyan ended every Shabbat with this song, Shiru Ladonai. And what we do each Shabbat is we put our arms around each other and we conclude as one community. And so we'll do that here right now.
A new song, we will sing unto God a new song. Sing unto God and we'll all sing along. All the earth, a new song unto God. Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz. Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash. We will sing unto God a new song.
Thank you all for being here. We're going to have a Shiva of sorts, a little bit of food in our welcome center, and we invite you all to stay and share some stories about Jonathan with each other. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, thank you. He would have loved the guitar at his